University of Guelph Arboretum. My name is Kitty, and behind the camera there, that's Jenny.
Hello!
And we are here today to bring a little bit more nature fun into your life. Now, with the weather warming up and a lot of plants poking their head up through the ground, it got me thinking a little bit more about seeds. It's kind of a bit of a wonder that the little seeds in this pine cone here, this cone here, can grow into a tree as big as that eastern hemlock where it came from. But the cool thing about this is inside every single seed in this cone, there's a set of instructions telling the plant how to grow. What happens is inside the seed there is a group of cells that are ready to grow into roots and stems and leaves, all those things. And those group of cells start off as the embryo inside the seed. And the embryo inside the seed, when the seed falls somewhere with the proper conditions, so the proper water and sunlight and air, the embryo is going to start to expand and then bust out of the seed. And that's what we call germination. For the first part of its growth, it's going to use food that's stored inside the seed, and it's going to grow little roots into the ground for water, and then it's going to grow upwards and form the first leaves of this plant. And those leaves, they're going to gather sunlight to eventually make food for the plant. Once those leaves are big enough to provide for the plant and those roots have a hole in the ground to get water, that's when the plant is really ready to start growing. And it's going to grow and grow and grow and eventually grow as big as a tree, just like that, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, for a seed like this to grow, it needs to fall somewhere where it's perfect for it, all right? So that may be somewhere really, really far away from the parent plant, especially if the parent plant wants to spread its genetics and wants the seed to go really, really far away. But that can be tricky if the plant is rooted into the ground and can't move around too much. Now, luckily for them, a lot of different plants have figured out ways for this to happen for their seeds. So we're going to check out some of those ways in which that happens. So follow me. All right, our first stop here is the maple tree. This is a sugar maple. It's usually a lot more recognizable when it has leaves.
You can see a couple of the leaves on the ground.
Yeah, there's lots of leaves around on the ground that might give you a clue as to what this might be if you're not super familiar with it without leaves. But if you see the leaves, or especially if you see maple seeds lying around, that could give you a pretty good clue as well. Over here, I have a maple seed. A lot of people know these as maple keys, or maybe even as helicopters as they spin through the air as they're falling. But a really cool thing is when we find seeds on the ground like this, there's a little tool that I like to use to help me figure out what I'm looking at, because some people might not be familiar with this. So at the University of Guelph Arboretum, we actually produce biodiversity sheets on all sorts of different topics. So I'm going to use one here called Native Trees, Fruits and Seeds in your neighborhood. If you are interested in this, or we have biodiversity sheets on wildlife, on fungus, on clouds, and all sorts of things, this is all available for order on our website. But I can take this biodiversity sheet which has all these pictures of different fruits and seeds of our native Ontario trees, and I can try to figure out what I'm looking at. Now, when we take a closer look at this sheet here, we notice that at the bottom, there's a bunch of pictures of maple seeds. So that's how we know this is from a maple tree. And you can even sometimes identify the species of maple based on the shape of the seed. So that's pretty cool. But all maple seeds kind of work the same way. They look kind of like this, and when they fall, they are asymmetrical. So that when they fall, they actually spin as they fall down. And that's why a lot of people sometimes know these as helicopters. I know when I was a kid, I grew up calling them helicopters because they spin in a circle as they fall down. This serves a really important purpose though, because as it spins, that slows down its descent. What happens is as it's spinning in the air, it creates a little vortex, a tornado-like vortex above the seed, and that lowers the air pressure above that seed. That gives it lift, to give it a little extra boost against gravity. So it falls a lot slower, and then that gives it time for the wind to then blow it far away from the parent plant to give it the best chance it has at landing somewhere with the proper conditions for it to grow and landing somewhere far away from the parent plant so the parent plant can spread its genetics. These guys actually develop in pairs on the tree, but when they fall only singly, so they are asymmetrical, so they could have that spinning motion as they fall. And they also fall when they are very, very dry, so that makes them extra light as well, further slowing their descent. So this works really, really well for the maple tree to use wind to their advantage to disperse the seed, which is pretty cool. Well, you can see kind of that it spun as it fell there. All right, it's not just the maple seed that has a cool trick up its sleeve to help disperse the seed. There are other trees that do other cool things as well. So I think I might pass it over to Jenny to talk to you a little bit more about it.
Yeah, awesome.
So this little area has tons of different trees, and our next tree is actually right close by, right on over there. So let's take a walk over. Tree over here is an oak tree, and a lot of people are familiar with the oak tree. They have those nice big lobed leaves once the leaves start coming in. But one of the other things that a lot of people find familiar that come from them are these guys right here. So we can probably find this on our sheet as well. But this guy is,
Maybe flip it over. I think it's on the other side. Let's see.
Oh, right there. Oh, so this is an acorn. So an acorn is an oak seed. And these guys are really interesting because they're obviously a lot heavier than a maple key. If this were to fall, it will drop straight to the ground. So it can't depend on wind for dispersal. It instead depends on dispersal by animals. See, this little acorn is packed full of protein and fats and carbohydrates, so full of nutrients. So it's actually a really important food source for a lot of different animals. You know, things like blue jays have been known to eat acorns, as well as maybe mice, deer have been even known to eat acorns. But one of the biggest culprits, one of the animals that loves acorns the most, would be squirrels. Squirrels love these acorns. So what ends up happening is these animals come on over to take advantage of this delicious, nutritious treat. And some animals, like mice or squirrels, they'll gather this treat and cache it for the winter. See, gray squirrels, they're active through the winter, but there's not a lot of food around here in our cold Canadian winters. So a lot of times they'll find food and they'll cache it, they'll bury it away somewhere and use that cache for later on in the year. Now, not all those caches get eaten, even though these squirrels have such amazing memories. Not every single cache gets broken into, and the acorns that remain buried, well, eventually they germinate in the soil where they've been taken far away and basically planted in the ground. And that's a great way for these guys to be dispersed. And interestingly enough, different types of acorns have different types of chemistry inside them, so they're actually cached differently. For example, things like white oats, studies found that white oats, when squirrels encounter a white oak acorn, they will eat the acorn up to 85% of the time instead of caching it away. Whereas things like red oaks, their acorns are cached about 60% of the time, so that's a big difference. And what's happening there is sometimes these acorns have different contents of a chemical called tannins in them. And tannins, they're pretty bitter, they're not very good to eat, and red oak trees tend to produce acorns with more tannins. So squirrels are more likely to take those acorns and bury them, cache them away for later, and eventually over time, as that acorn has the tannins leached out from it, then it's a little bit more appetizing for squirrels. It's a little bit better to eat. Whereas white oak acorns, they have less tannins and they're good to eat basically right away for those squirrels. So that's kind of where the difference is. They have the same kind of dispersal methods, but not all acorns are made the same, which is kind of interesting. And those chemicals, those tannins inside the red oak acorn serves a purpose as well, because white oaks, when they drop their acorns, those acorns grow in the same year. But red oaks, they tend to grow in the following spring. So those tannins help preserve and protect that acorn staying on the ground all through the winter. It's actually pretty interesting. And if you're really into oak trees, you can actually look at an acorn, look at the shape of it, and use that as a clue to help you identify what type of oak tree it came in without having to figure out the tannin content of that acorn, which is kind of fun. So that's what we came to visit this lovely oak tree for. But we do have actually another tree on the list. And it's a pretty cool one. It's actually one of my favorite dispersal methods, or I guess seed adaptations. So why don't we make a little trek on over to our very last special tree. Well, that was a little nice walk through the Arboretum. Yeah, it was a beautiful day today, so I think it was worth the walk. But here's one of the trees that I wanted to show you guys today. So this is actually a jack pine tree, and they're kind of cool. If you see an individual with more needles on it, you can actually identify them with the needle. They're evergreen trees, so we don't have the same problem with the deciduous trees in terms of only being able to use their leaves for part of the year. But jack pines have needles in bunches of two, kind of like the Scots pine, which is a non-native. But unlike the Scots pine, which have needles that are kind of twisted together, the jack pine needles are held out from each other in a big V. So that's kind of how you can tell jack pine by the needles. But I find one of the easier ways to tell jack pine is by looking at one of their cones. So we can see a picture of a jack pine cone both on our sheet. And also the tree is full of them. There's lots and lots of them. Let's see if I can find one. Oh, here's one on the ground that I can see. So we can get a nice close look at that. And jack pine cones are really cool because you can see it's actually all closed up. The pine cone is all closed up with resin, and it's actually kind of dormant like this, except for when it's exposed to heat. So heat's what's gonna make this pine cone open up and release all the seeds inside. And this is actually adaptive. It's advantageous for this tree to have this trait because one of the sources of heat in maybe a forest would be something like a forest fire. So if a forest fire came to wherever these jack pines were and kind of burned down all the mature trees around it, this is really good to have these cones open up and have these seeds exposed, because that means all the mature trees in the area, if they're burnt down, they're not going to be competition from the little sprouts from the seeds here. You know, there's not going to be big, tall, mature trees shading out the sun, competing for nutrients in the soil. The fire is also going to expose mineral soil that's going to be good and nutritious for the seeds in this cone to grow in. So these guys are kind of cool that way, where they take advantage of something like a forest fire to become open and kind of germinate down in the ground. And of course, there's not going to be always forest fires to help these guys open up. A nice hot sunny day, the heat from that will actually get these guys to open up as well. So there's a couple of different ways that these guys open up, but they're kind of neat that way. They grow in closed up, which I think is really neat. So that's the final tree we wanted to share with you guys today. Thank you so much for joining us. And there's so many things for nature to share. It's so cool, all the things and adaptations the plants have out here. And of course, we can't get to everything today in one video. So I encourage you guys, if you guys are near a tree, maybe next time have a closer look at it. You know, have a look at its seeds. Think about how that seed might travel, how it might disperse, how that tree got planted there in the first place. How did that seed get there? And those are kind of really neat things to think about. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.